Good evening, everyone. The time is 7:02 on June the 24th, 2024, and I'm going to call to order the Board of School Directors of Upper Dublin's legislative meeting for the month of June 2024. And Ms. Evans, if you could call the roll of the directors, please.
Ms. Evans. I'll come back to her. Ms. Iannetti.
Present.
Mr. Held. Ms. Redding.
Present.
Ms. Sherpier. Dr. Thomas.
Present.
Mr. Sirota.
Present.
Mr. Warschauer.
Present.
Mr. Wallach.
Present.
Thank you. And we have 2 on Google Meet.
Okay.
tonight.
And Ms. Evans is up there as well, just for the record. Okay.
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. If everyone could please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to those in the audience, those listening at home. School is technically out for the year, but we have a pretty full agenda tonight for our legislative meeting, so we're going to hop right into it. Our first is this evening, our student representative, who's usually here, is not here tonight because it is summer break, so we'll go right to our superintendent's report with Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Wallach, and hello, everyone. I actually have some slides this evening. It's been a busy month of June, and I thought some pictures might help us to celebrate. So clearly we had graduation, but a couple of things that I'd like to share with you. Next slide, please. I'll go over some enrollment and staffing. I want to share our subgroup representation. I'll give you some highlights of our administrative retreat, graduation, and then some very exciting administrative updates. So first of all, I'm sharing enrollment because we are carefully monitoring our elementary enrollment, particularly kindergarten. It's always the one that is the most tricky to project going into the next year. You don't know how many registrations you're going to receive. So we have been keeping the board abreast of our registrations each month. And we are pacing, I guess, closer to what we have in past years at this point in time, but we are still below where we have projected that to be. However, with Mr. Hoffman's help, we have looked at historically how our registrations have grown from the June report until the students actually sitting in front of us in September. And you can see in that bottom chart, we've calculated what the average percentage growth is, and then we've used that to take what we currently have in June and project where we'll be in September. So if that comes to fruition, we will need the 4 staff members in each of the buildings in kindergarten. Right now, if you look at the numbers, the average class sizes are pretty low with those number of sections, but as our students register. So this is one of those that we will need to keep watching and pay careful attention to in July and August, but right now we are projecting that we will still need those staff members, so we will keep the board abreast if anything changes. The next slide then gives you, this is required annually as part of the CAP agreement that we provide to the school board during a public meeting, some data concerning subgroup representations in certain courses. So I'm just going to share an example and then I'll show you some summary data. And again, this is something Mr. Hoffman has pulled for us where we pull every AP course, every honors course, and then Algebra 1 at the middle school, and we break that out by race or ethnicity in the number of students within each of those. So I'm sharing here just what honors chemistry looked like this past school year. You can see the number of students by race there and the percentage that aligns with that. Then on the next slide, you will see in the upper left is this school year, and I apologize, it's a little small, but you can see what is our actual population. So for our African American students at the high school this year, they make up 8.7% of our population. 2% of that population is in our advanced placement courses. I believe that says 5% is in honors, and when you combine the AP and the honors together, you can see it's 3.80%. So this summarizes that earlier slide where we have every single course course, broken out. This summarizes for you so that you can then also compare to what's just the size of the population. So I also then gave you the 22-23 comparison so that you can see how numbers have changed. And we've also shown you what it looks like at Sandy Run in terms of the 8th grade population and the 8th grade Algebra 1 numbers there. And then Mr. Hoffman was actually able to go back to 17-18 for the high school, so you can see how we have changed over time. So again, if I just continue at that top line and looking at our African American students, back in 17-18 we had 2.9% of them enrolled in AP and honors courses, and that has now increased to 3.8 and stayed steady into this current year. And you can see that for the different race populations there as well. So then moving on, I just wanted to share slightly, we did have our administrative retreat, and our theme this year was a reset mindset, an opportunity to reflect upon what has gone really well and what we are very proud of, and then how do we build upon that. And with new leadership as well as a comprehensive plan coming, it just seemed like a perfect theme for us. So we did have 2 days together this past week. Our full administrative team was together. And so this slide here is day one was June 18th, and our theme was setting the stage for 24-25. You can see what some of our learning intentions were there, and a huge thank you to the Temple University Ambler campus, our neighbor, and was a great opportunity for us to get on that campus and see all of the amazing things that I think we can build some stronger partnerships with. But we had an opportunity to be innovative and think about esports, and we also did a low ropes course for some team building and trust and relationship exercises. So that was, as well as clearly some work on our mission and vision as well. The second day was on the 19th, and this was resetting impactful instructional leadership and defining our focus on instruction. And we started our day at our very own Robbins Park and did a learning walk through the park with prompting questions about leadership and universal design for learning. And you can see Ms. Kim was not afraid to pick up the turtle that we found on our walk, but was a really great way to start our day. So I think we're off to a great start. We have one more day coming up on the next slide. You will see that, and that is this coming week. We have Julia Skolnick joining us to start out the science of learning and leadership, where we will learn about these 6 gears and what that means to be a leader here in the education world. So very exciting. And then, of course, the big moment for June was graduation. And I know, this was my first, but for those of you that have come, red was a first this year to have the students in their red caps and gowns, and boy did it pop. It just looked amazing. It was a wonderful ceremony, some changes to the logistics this year that we've received a lot of positive feedback for. And you can see on this slide then just a couple different pictures of our speakers, our singers, and just our class as they were very happily celebrating, and it was an absolutely beautiful night. And thank you to everybody who contributed to making that successful. Congratulations to our graduates and their families as well. Then I would like to give a huge shout out to our Chief Academic Officer, Mr. Hoffman, as he don't look at me. Dave has been amazing and really helped me to transition here, and I'm happy to share for him, sad for us, but he is moving on to a different position in another school district, and we wish him the absolute best. I couldn't not put the cat in the hat up there because he's been my partner in crime, as well as my right hand as we have traversed the last 6 months. So thank you personally very much, Dave, and best wishes to you. Congratulations. And then we have an exciting opportunity this evening. The board was gracious enough to grant my request for an assistant superintendent here in the school district, and we have conducted a very thorough interview process with over 40 applications, and are very excited tonight to present to the board our recommended candidate, Mrs. Julian Drennan. She is here with her family. She currently serves as the Director for Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development at Lower Moreland, where she has been in that role for the last 9 years, but spent her entire career there. She has been a school leader at all 3 levels. She is extremely thoughtful and detailed in her work, careful consideration to all aspects of different scenarios, and brings a really strong instructional background and experiences that I know will complement our team and enhance teaching and learning here at Upper Dublin. Her references were absolutely excellent and glowing, and they shared her commitment to education, students, and strong relationships, indicating she is a critical thinker and empathetic to those she works with, always focusing on students. So we are extremely excited to be presenting her to the board this evening, and they will take action a little bit later, but welcome to Julian and your family. Thank you. And the last thing I have for you is just enjoy the summer. We hope that all of our students have already started to enjoy the summer and are getting to have some fun time with their family and friends. And we look forward to seeing everybody in the fall. Thank you, Mr. Wallach.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you for all of that information and updates. To Mr. Hoffman and to Ms. Drennan, we'll have comments when we get there, but we've got to wait until we get to the personnel part of the agenda. So I will hold some thoughts on that. With that, we move into our first opportunity for public participation. This is for action items and agenda items only. So if anyone would like to address the board, please come forward, state your name and city of residence, or affirm that you are a resident or taxpayer of our district. And Ms. Evans will time your 4 minutes.
Anita Brister, Fort Washington. Okay. I'll start with hopefully a simple question, because if I'm wrong, you should correct me, but I know you won't do it until after community input. I was here last week with Ginny at the Finance Committee meeting, and it was the amount that you're putting into the capital reserve was $7,200,000, whatever. Which I'm against putting all of that in, but I think it's actually, there's another 3 million perhaps so it could be 10 million. So I'm just asking for clarification on that, because maybe I misunderstood last week. I was working with a number of 7 million. Anyway, the reason I'm against it is there is now a multi-year pattern where you keep putting all of the surplus. We're lucky to have surpluses, although if you misuse them, I don't actually put that in the lucky category. So whether it's 7 million, whether it's 10 million, all you need to offset any tax increase to give us zero, as you well know, is a little over 1.7 million. So my point here is there's plenty of surplus to put a good chunk, millions, into the capital reserve while you would give us a 0% tax increase. I watched any meeting I couldn't make since March. I watched on video, and I watched over that amount of time. I only saw 2 board members who kind of advocated to maybe go a little bit lower. I don't think they were advocating for 0. I would have been advocating for 0, and I wish somebody on this board would have done that. But 2 board members did advocate to try to go lower, I think along the same lines of what I'm saying, that there still would be millions to put into the capital reserve. That didn't go anywhere. I would ask those 2 board members to vote no. Vote no to the budget, because you are the ones that are right. You are representing the taxpayers to try to go lower. It's very unfair to seniors, to people on a fixed income. Joan and I just, in a brief moment, were talking about how we are both, and we're both still spending thousands from the tornado damage. And I don't know that anybody on this board really cares about that. And it's kind of sad. I mean, my husband and I, we just kind of took like one section of our yard that was destroyed. We fixed one section, and the other section is hopefully going to get fixed in the next few months, and you would never even believe the estimates on what needs to be done there. So basically, and then you have in your budget, your own budget documents that over the last 4 years, I believe it is, you've put 33 million into capital reserve. But each of those years, you needed something similar to this 1.7 million to go to 0, and then still put the rest. I am not against a savings fund. I am against overtaxation. I think it's very unfair. And in my personal opinion, I'm sure some of you disagree, I think to raise taxes like this every single year when you've got a big surplus is not only unfair, I think it's unethical. And it's absolutely not fair to people on a fixed income or seniors. And it's not good for the district, okay? I've brought this up so many times. Our per pupil spending, just take us and take Wissahickon, and then you're going to tell me Wissahickon has more business. Yeah, they do. We have to deal with what we have. People moving to this area also look at Wissahickon and many other districts in Montgomery County. Our per pupil
Ms. Brister,
spending,
you're out of
our
time
per
for
pupil
this time.
spending is almost $30,000. Okay, our millage rates don't compare well. I think board
Ms.
members.
Brister, I appreciate your
I'm done.
comments.
I'll be back for a second one.
Thank you very much. One second. Ms. Brister, I do apologize. I had misread the clock. There were a couple seconds left. I apologize. I apologize for that. That was my error. I saw a 0 up there, and it was a 10. So I do apologize. I'll be happy to afford you those 10 seconds at second input. I do apologize. Please.
Hi, some of you know me. I'm Dr. Joan Frizzell, emerita faculty from a local university, which means no longer getting a earned paycheck. And I've been in Upper Dublin since 1991. There are many things I'm proud about with the school. There's many things that I think are just amazing when I've talked to Upper Dublin students. And yet, as a senior citizen now, I'm looking at tax increases. Well, I've looked at them before because I know senior citizens in Stewart Creek Farm that made decisions to move because of our high tax rate. I also know people who, as a result of the tornado, decided that the cost of rebuild with the added cost of taxes and the trauma from the tornado made the decision to sell and move. In my cul-de-sac, Tupelo Grove, the night of the tornado, only 5 out of 30 homes were livable. My neighbors and I counted this past week, out of 30 people, only 16 are pre-tornado. Only 16 homes are pre-tornado. So that kind of tells you what local people have been dealing with. Like many of my neighbors, I'm still dealing with large issues related to the tornado and the difficulty of getting sufficient people to come in and continue with the rebuild. And then I look at the fact that, thank goodness, you've had some tax overages and you've put them into savings, which is great because it's always good to have a rainy day fund. But when I look at the fact that it's been more than $7 million into the rainy day fund this year for capital expenditures and that you're close to about $30 million, I'm here as a local resident dealing with a lot of the issues that other people are dealing with, saying, wouldn't it be great to give us a 0 tax increase? Or wouldn't it be great to look at how we can reduce this 2% down to something that people can deal with without people talking about, well, if they keep raising taxes between the township and the school board, I'm going to have to move. And I'm sorry to hear people say that. Thank you so much for your time.
Jenny Vitella, Ambler. David, I have to say, I was very disappointed to see that you were leaving us. I think you've been amazing, and you did a great job with our curriculum. I've been coming to those education meetings and all these meetings for about 11 years, and I think it was the smoothest running under you and well thought out and implemented with consideration of various people and needs of children. So it was amazing, and you will be missed. We have an assistant superintendent who's going to get approved this evening. And I guess I would love to have a further explanation why we need this. Laurie, I'm not supposed to bring up names, but we just got a new superintendent in December. And within 3 months, we're looking for an assistant superintendent. So I don't really understand, with our same enrollment, there isn't like some huge influx of children. Matter of fact, those numbers for kindergarten are lower than around the 300. It'll probably get up to 300. And I just don't really understand why we need that, especially when we're increasing taxes. We have a lot of these capital improvements, and, you know, and I'm specifically upset about it because the elementary schools asked for aides. And I think we made a choice of giving them some aides, not all that they asked for, which seems directly dealing with children versus a superintendent, which helps our administrative running things. And I just don't know why there's a need with our staffing. And I guess maybe with David leaving, things will shift around. I don't know, but that wasn't the case 3 months ago, or maybe you knew about it, I don't know. But I just really would like an explanation why this is not cheap. It's a $195,000 base salary plus benefits, plus PZERs. It's expensive to add this new employee. And I just wondered if more classroom teachers or aides might have been a better allocation of those funds. Also, I noticed in the coming up on the agenda that we're approving multiple different contracts for different employees. It looks like mostly everybody but the teachers. And I just looked at the Act 93, which is administrative, and it's a 3% increase in wages. I assume that that's in our budget approval, that 3% is already in there. Just confirm for me that this meeting would be the first that we, the public, have seen those contracts. I don't recall them ever being brought up. I didn't even know they were coming up this time, and it's quite a few. Oh, that's it, the 3%, okay. And then I guess really to piggyback again on what Anita said, what Joan is referring to, people, I know it's me speaking, I know it's us that come to meetings, but really people just cannot understand why we are getting a 2% tax increase so that we can save $37 million total, right? I know that there's projects out there to the tune of, the known projects, to the tune of $2.28 million over the next 3 years. I get it. That doesn't include a real thoughtful analysis about what kind of money we're going to need for Jarrettstown. Our debt is 11-12% of our budget. It's $194 million in total. And I get that, but are we spending things on things we don't need? Again, this capital, and you know I'm so against this bus depot and spending the money when transportation in its entirety is only 4% of our budget. And again, that $3 million planned transfer could be reduced by $1.8 million for a zero tax increase, and we'd still be transferring almost $8 million because of the budget overage. And people are really upset about it. We have been taxed up or doubling. What we are known for is high taxes. Every single person I run into, no matter where we are, oh, you're in Upper Dublin. Oh, I can never live there. The taxes are too high. So know that that's a problem. Thank you.
Hello, Dave Doherty, Fort Washington, and keep it quick. Just want to make sure anytime you're considering spending money, you look long and hard at needs versus wants. But I think you're a bit reckless, confusing it. I'm sure the new assistant, talented person, but do we really need her? Look the taxpayers in the eye, particularly the senior citizens who are on fixed income, have been paying more than their fair share. It's a nice buzzword I'm sure people like to hear for decades. So anytime you're considering adding something, I have 3 kids in the district. I feel like a lot of times when older people come up here, people look at them like, oh, hey, they're cranks, they're complaining about tax again. 100% see where they're coming from. I would like to see them shown some more respect. Thank you.
Okay, I do not see anyone else approaching, so I will close our first opportunity for public participation. Dr. Smith, are there any responses from the administration initially?
Yes, Mr. Wallach, thank you. Just to clarify a few things, there were several staffing requests this year, and each one is valued based upon a need or a want and prioritized, and we certainly are not able to meet all of those needs. We present what we believe are appropriate and fiscally responsible needs for our district. Not all positions are driven by an enrollment. It's certainly easy to look at enrollment. Those are logical, sequential. We have class size guidelines. Those are easier. There are some that are not driven by enrollment, and one of them being the assistant superintendent position, which I think is critical for a district of our size. Through my entry plan, you will be able to see the areas of need that have been called out, and we're looking for somebody to bridge student services and teaching and learning, and so I believe that is a very important position for us. And when we presented that to the board, we did have conversation about potential future restructuring of the teaching and learning department, which may come in the future as we think about our positions. Most of the comprehensive plans that are for approval, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Kitten, are there as annual approvals that we do. Act 93 is based upon a term, and so its term came up. And you are correct, that is a 3% is in there, and actually I think is a great step forward compared to what was in the previous contracts. Makes things a little bit more predictable for us. And I think I will turn to Mr. Leckman. Could you just clarify the capital reserve transfer and what was budgeted, please?
Yeah, so I think the question is $7.2 million is the projected surplus, so that's the recommendation that's on there tonight. The $3 million that was budgeted was approved in March, so that transfer was approved by the board in March and transferred.
Thank you, Mr. Leckman. That's all I have, Mr. Wallach.
Thank you for that, Dr. Smith, and Mr. Leckman for that clarification. Covered a couple of points I wanted to touch. One thing I just wanted to touch on so everyone knows, one of the agenda items tonight will be the budget. And we do need to vote on a budget. And just so when we hear vote no to the budget, just so everybody's clear, if we vote no to a budget, it means we don't have a budget. There's actually a slight distinction, just so that people appreciate, between voting no to the budget and perhaps disagreeing with, as we all have discussions up here, and we've had them in finance, in terms of what a piece of that budget may be vis-a-vis a tax increase to the community. So I just wanted to put that out there so that everybody sort of understood that distinction. Hopefully I've explained that and not confused people even more. I think I appreciate all of the comments. The board always does. When I hear comments that the board doesn't care, I think we all sit up here because we do care. We need to make decisions, and sometimes we need to make hard decisions, but we base those on information. We base those on information received from the administration, from our school district, from our community, and we make the best decisions we can, and I believe they're all made in an ethical fashion. So it's a tough decision tonight, and a decision that we have every year when we get to this point in the school year, in our budget cycle, and in our meetings. So that's all I have. Any other board members have any comments on the public participation? Okay. With that, we'll move on to our agenda items. First up is our minutes. The board has been provided with minutes from our May the 20th legislative meeting. They have been circulated, and could I get a motion to approve those minutes? Mr. Sirota, thank you. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Iannitti, thank you so much. Questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I will pause for the online ayes. Now I've heard them. Appreciate it. Very good. Next, we'll move on to our committee recommendations. First up is education, and Ms. Sherbier.
Thank you, Mr. Wallach. We have items A through K. All of them were discussed in Education Committee. The one area that I want to highlight is that the conferences were not discussed. They are all for food services attendance, staff to attend a conference. And I think everything else we discussed in Education Committee. So I'd like to make a motion that the board approve items A through K.
Ms. Sherbier, will you be taking L separately? I think there's an L as well, student activities?
Apologize. That is the trip of the football team, and that is also included, yes. So A through L, my apologies.
No
So I
worries.
make a motion that the board approve items A through L in the education section.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Iannitti, thank you so much. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I have to wait on technology. Apologies. Okay. Motion carries. Thank you so much. Next, we will move on to our Finance Committee recommendations and Mr. Sirota.
Thank you. 22 items under finance this month, as we often have in June. There are a lot. All of these were discussed in detail last week at the Finance Committee, except item V, which is our regular monthly payments. I'm going to pull 2 items out separately to vote on separately, and then do the rest by consent. First one I'd like to pull out is item 6B, Sandy Run contract change order. So I'd like to make a motion to approve item 6B.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sirota. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Redding, thank you so much. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? That would be me. I will abstain from that motion to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest given my professional business relationship with the contractor at issue on that change order. Returning to Mr. Sirota.
Thank you. The next item I'd like to pull out is item 6I, which is our final budget and funding resolutions. It is our custom here in Upper Dublin, it's not a requirement or board policy, but it is our custom to vote on these by a roll call vote. So I'd like to make a motion to approve item 6I and vote by roll call.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sirota. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Redding, thank you so much. I will grant the request for roll call vote when we get there, but first, let me ask if there are any questions or comments from the board. Ms. Evans? Ms. Evans, to Ms. Evans.
I know we discussed this at the Finance Committee meeting, but I'm going to reiterate my position by making a motion to amend the motion in order to adjust the proposed tax increase from 2.07% to 1.55%, which effectively reduces the planned transfer by $450,000 from $3 million to $2.55 million.
Okay, we have a motion to amend on the floor. In order to advance that motion, we would need a second to that motion to amend. Am I correct on that, Mr. Diazio? Yeah. Is there a second to that motion to amend?
I second that motion.
Dr. Thomas, thank you so much. Questions or comments from the board on the motion to amend? So this is on Ms. Evans's motion to amend from 2.07 to 1.55. Questions or comments from the board?
I'd like to comment.
Dr. Thomas, sure. I'll let you go first.
Just my amendment to, or my second to that amendment is to signify my desire for our budgeting to be more precise. That way we don't have such a big surplus to be transferring on the back end. And then also my previously stated desire that the administrative salary budget doesn't include the outgoing CAO position because it would offset the hire of the new superintendent. And kind of when we had those discussions about adding that position, we talked about a restructure that may make that addition of that position revenue neutral. So that's why I seconded the amendment.
Appreciate it. Ms. Evans, do we have either Ms. Evans or Mr. Held online?
Go ahead, Ms. Evans.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to apologize for not being there in person. I'm at a dance competition with my daughter that I could not miss. So, and I know this is an important vote, but I did nevertheless want to reiterate my position. So as I explained during the Finance Committee, we sort of have a rough rule of thumb that we've been working with from ICS, sort of a recommendation, I guess I'll call it, that we've saved between 1% and 3% of our total facility value. And since that is currently $325 million, 3% of that would be $9.75 million. So just walking through the math of how I got here, right, we have a $7.2 million surplus from the school year that's about to end. And that's a projected surplus, but, we feel pretty good about it. And then on top of that, we have a proposed plan transfer in the current budget of $3 million, which would take us to 10.2. So that's over that 3%. And, as I mentioned during the meeting, it's not a hard and fast ceiling. It's not as though we can't go over it, but I think it's a good rule of thumb for us to use. So, in order to get to that 9.75 million, we would effectively reduce the plan transfer by $450,000. So that's kind of how I got to this math. And, roughly, if every 0.1% is $86,000. So that's how I got, just to walk people through, from the 2.07 down to the 1.55% that I moved for. In my view, it still affords us ample savings, both this year and looking ahead for the next 5+ years, without any further transfers, which we know we're going to have, right, as a result of plan transfers and perhaps future surpluses. I think it's also worth mentioning to the community, to the extent that this passes, I can't promise that we'll be able to stay this low in the future, but I continue to believe that when we're setting the plan transfer for next year, the amount of the surplus from the prior year should be taken into account. So that's kind of what I'm doing. That's why it's coming up now, right? Because the amount of that surplus from the 23-24 school year increased from last month to this month. So in case anybody's wondering, why didn't we talk about this earlier? That's why. And that increase put us over that 3% kind of rule of thumb or guardrail that I'll call it. So again, that's the basis for my motion. I know many of you heard this during Finance Committee, but I just wanted to put it on the record for this meeting.
Thank you for that, Ms. Evans. Comments, questions on the motion to amend? Mr. Sirota.
I'm opposed to this motion for two reasons. One is I appreciate the approach that Jenna is bringing to this and the way she got there on the math. It's the 3% number as a figure to use in a formula that she's proposing that I don't really like. The closest, when we dug into where that it was 1.5% to 3% that we heard from ICS. When we asked ICS for a source for that recommendation, they couldn't actually find one. It's a recommendation that they've used in their industry for some time, but couldn't find a source. The only source they found, and I also independently found this source from the federal government, recommends 2 to 4% for your total maintenance and repairs budget, 2 to 4% of your total replacement value of your assets. So if we were going to pick a number to use in a formula, I'd rather pick 4% because we actually have a citable source for that instead of a 3%, which is, to the best of my knowledge, is made up. So if we're going to do something formulaic, I'd like it to be based on something that we can point our fingers at, and the only thing we found to point our fingers at would be 4 instead of 3. But more importantly, I think it's too late. I don't want to be making these budget adjustments at the last minute. We did that last year as well. And it's a mad scramble to get the budget complete and submitted by the end of the month to the state. And we've talked about it enough that I feel we should stick with what we already had and not be making these very 11th hour adjustments that aren't well thought through. And when I say very well thought through, it's not that Jenna's analysis wasn't well thought through, but what the paperwork would look like, exactly what the motion would look like, exactly what the budget would look like. We don't have that in front of us. So exactly what numbers we'll be tweaking, we don't have that in front of us.
Ms. Redding.
So I have a couple of reasons I'm opposed to this as well. When we think about where borrowing interest rates are, we're about 6 or 8%, and that's today. So if the district was to borrow $10 million today, that would cost the district an additional $11 million to borrow that money. We have over $37 million worth of projects or $32 million of projects over the next 5 years that we need to also consider. If we reduce the taxes by what's being proposed over the next 10 years, in terms of interest on that money, not even compounded, it's about $150,000. If we compound that interest, we're at about $600,000 just from giving it back right now. We can never put that back into the budget unless we raise taxes in the future. And it's going against expenses. Every year, we're going to have to make this decision to reduce. So it's not a reoccurring expense, it's a one-time expense. When we look at the interim taxes, we'll slow significantly. So we've been getting a lot of our surplus from interim taxes. We look at the apartment building at the ADP site. We don't see any additional building in pipeline coming down the road. BET, our largest tax contributor, consistently is coming back and requesting reductions year over year. That's one of our largest business expenses, business tax contributors in the district. I personally want to not only think about the current taxpayer, but what do we do about our future taxpayers? So personally, I would rather see a slight increase year over year, about 2%, than have that future taxpayer have to breathe in that 5% because of a decision we made today. When we think about where we're at with the 2.07, it's below inflation, which is at 3.3%. It's below our salary increases, which is at 2.5, but Act 93 is at 3.6 or 3%? 3.3, thank you. And then if you were at our finance meeting where we have these discussions in detail, you would see by drastically reducing that transfer by what is being proposed tonight puts the district in a deficit. We already start to see that by next year we are no longer at that break-even point if we don't put that in. So for me, it's too much of a risk to decrease the taxes by that amount if we're not looking at it long-term. So for me, I oppose it for those reasons.
Thank you, Ms. Reddy. Mr. Held, I believe.
Go ahead, Ms. Evans.
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to a thing. And again, this is, I think folks obviously need to make this vote, for their own reasons, and I will freely admit that there is no bias for that. I think just sort of throw this comment about, having to kind of adjust the paperwork at the last minute. I mean, we went through this last year, true. And if I recall correctly, and Mr. Leckman can keep me on, we wound up taking the uncomplicated route, right, which was just adjusting the paperwork that we would submit to reflect that the tax increase is going to be, again, per my proposal, right, 1.55% instead of 2.07. That did have the consequence, I want to be fully transparent, of us having a structurally unbalanced budget, which, again, is not my most favorite thing, but I'm willing to take that sacrifice in order to reduce the tax increase. And I believe what we talked about last time, because I went back and watched it to remind myself about how this process works, what we decided was, look, if there are sufficient funds, we can still do the $3 million tax increase. Our budget. So again, if memory serves, this wasn't a super complicated process to do it, but fully transparent, it does have the consequence of creating a structurally unbalanced budget. So I want to make that very transparent to everybody. I'm not trying to hide the ball, but I think that's the way we did it last year, and that's probably what I would propose here. So Mr. Leckman, did I get that correct?
So Ms. Evans, you were cutting in and out a little bit, but I think what we ultimately ended up doing last year was just changing one number. We changed the tax increase and we let that fall through as a deficit budget. But again, I'm not here to talk about how much work I have. There's more to it than just changing one number. There's lots of things that need to happen, but ultimately I'm here to do that work for the board, so.
If I can just reply to that, I thought the proposal I heard from you, Jenna, was to change the plan transfer, which is a much bigger job than balancing the budget out of fund balance.
So, yeah, it effectively would change it, but yes, what I'm really proposing is to do exactly what we did last year. Now, we had all sort of agreed when we reduced the tax increase from 2% to 1.6 that, you know, that's the most likely place we would pull it from if needed. As it turned out, we didn't need to because we had surplus, so we wound up still approving a $3 million transfer. But yeah, just my proposal is if we would need the money, right, if we didn't have a surplus, that's where it would come from.
I'm going to get Ms. Ioannidis first, and then we'll go to Mr. Held. Ms. Ioannidis.
I just want to say, I mean, we did talk about this at length in the finance meeting, and I'm still in the same spot. And the biggest reason for me to keep it at 2.07 is just knowing we have these upcoming projects. And when we did our last facility assessment, that didn't even include Jarretttown, which is a huge project. So I think 2.07% is a reasonable request. As Alima said, it's lower than inflation. It's lower than the Act 1 index. And also Alima said, I'd rather have a little more consistent increase than to be going up and down a lot. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Mr. Held.
Great, thank you. And I also apologize for not being there in person. I would love to be with you all. Had a pre-planned trip, and so unable to be with you in person, but I'm still where I was at the Finance Committee meeting as well. And I'll be on the record. I love the taxes to be as low as possible, but you run the risk of cutting them too much and then having to raise them higher than you would like long term. Jarretttown's top of mind for me as well. My kids go there, they've gone through there. I know we still have to do an analysis of the building to see what it needs long term, to see sort of, you know, major renovation, is it a knockdown and build something new? We don't know, but at some point that building will need some attention, and that's going to cost money. And so to the extent that we can save the taxpayer money long term by, you know, having this surplus transfer now, the hope is that it means we don't have to increase taxes even more down the road. And so I would love to be able to knock the taxes down even more, but I think where they are now is the right place. And so that's why I'll be opposed to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Held. Ms. Sherpier.
Yes, thank you. I am also still where I was during the finance meeting at 2.07. This is not about more or less work for Mr. Lackman. I'm sorry, Mr. Lackman, I appreciate. But this is really about our long-term stewardship of the community funding. I understand that it's tempting to lower the rate this time, but I am very concerned that then the next time we'll be bumping up much more. So for reasons very similar to what Alima presented very eloquently, I am going to stay at my 2.07.
I will just add that we did have a vibrant discussion at Finance Committee meeting last week, I guess it was. I appreciate all the discussion tonight and the ability for us to reflect upon additional information, additional comment received. I too am still where I was at the finance meeting last week for the reasons I stated at that meeting and as reinforced by some of the comments that have been articulated here this evening. So that's just where I am personally. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Redding.
What I would add also is we have 8-9 months of budget talk. If we want to be at a 1.5% or a 0%, that we're having that conversation as a community, as a board, when the conversation starts, not at the last meeting of the year. Because then as a board and as a community, we can make the choices as to what we're going to move forward with and what we're not going to move forward with that in mind. So to do this at the very last minute when we've already made a year's worth of decisions based off of anticipated adjustment that we were going to have, to me, is just irresponsible.
Somebody online?
Yeah, I had one more comment when there's a chance.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have to just react to the last minute just because I don't want anybody to get the impression that, you know, I was sitting here waiting to make this motion at the very last minute just to make things exciting. As I mentioned, right, when we had the Finance Committee in May, the projected surplus from the 23-24 school year was $5.6 million. It increased to $7.2 million in a month's time. And there's very good reasons for that. Nothing nefarious happened. But that was a big change for me. And again, that change to me was critical. It put us over this kind of, 3% benchmark that we've been talking about. We have it in materials. We've gotten it from ICS. So again, I need to make clear I'm not trying to sandbag things or make things difficult. It's just there was a pretty fundamental change, in my opinion, from May to June. And that's the basis of my motion.
Anything else on the motion to amend? Okay. Thanks to everyone for that discussion. What I'm going to do now is call for a vote on the motion to amend. We don't need to do this by roll call because it is not the budget vote. It's a motion to amend. So everyone that's in favor of the motion to amend, please say aye.
Aye.
Everyone that is opposed to the motion to amend, please say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Ms. Evans, did you get 9 votes on that?
2 aye and 7 no.
Right, for a total of 9. I wanted to make sure you
That's
recorded
correct.
all
Yes,
9 votes.
that's
My
correct.
apologies. Yep.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so only 2 votes in favor, so the motion does not carry. So we are now back to our original motion, which was Mr. Sirota's motion for item I of the finance agenda as stated in the agenda. Further questions or comments? We have one?
Go ahead, Ms. Evans.
Yeah, so I just want to explain how this is going to work here because some people may be wondering why I'm about to change my vote. So assuming that there are no other motions to amend the 2.07 any further, what we're effectively now going to vote on is having a budget or not having a budget. And I am not in favor of not having a budget. There's a lot of really bad consequences to that. So even though, I clearly have different views about what the tax increase should be, I am going to vote yes on this motion. Again, unless there is a motion to amend in some other way. But I didn't want anyone to be confused or, wonder why I flip-flopped, but there is a very good reason for it, and I just wanted to explain that.
Ms. Evans, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Thomas?
I just wanted to echo what Ms. Evans had to say, that I do support the idea of having a budget. I do think there is value in having continued conversation as new information comes in, and that it's okay to keep questioning, and that there's value to that.
Excellent, most definitely. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Other motions? Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to call it for a vote. And Ms. Evans, this we will do by roll call vote, so if you could please call the roll of the board members. Board members, please respond individually when your name is called.
And we are voting on item 6I, the final budget and funding resolutions.
Correct.
When I call your name, if you could answer yes for an affirmative vote or no for a negative vote. Okay? Ms. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Ionetti?
Yes.
Mr. Held?
Yes.
Ms. Redding?
Yes.
Ms. Sherpier?
Yes.
Dr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Sirota?
Yes.
Mr. Warschauer?
Yes.
Mr. Wallach?
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Motion carries. Now I go back to Mr. Sirota for the rest of the finance agenda.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to approve the other 20 items under Section 6, the Finance Committee recommendations. That is 6A through V, excluding B and I. Is that a sufficient way to say that? I'd like to make a motion to approve those 20 items.
I wasn't going to count them, but I'll trust you on that with the alphabet there. Thank you for that motion, Mr. Sirota. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Redding, thank you so much. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Excellent. Next, we are moving on to our Personnel Committee recommendations, and Ms. Redding.
Thank you. So we have 5 recommendations for personnel. We will be splitting them up for A through D, so I'd like to make a motion with a special highlight that B will be for our Assistant Superintendent, welcoming Mrs. Julian Drennan to the district. I put a motion.
Thank you, Ms. Redding. Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Ms. Ionetti, thank you so much. Questions or comments on the motion, and that's items A through D? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Excellent. We'll come back to a couple of the items in there in a minute, but let's finish the agenda first. Ms. Redding, back to you.
And then final is compensation plans, doing that separate. So put a movement, move forward with that vote.
So there'd be a motion for item
For that,
E?
for E.
E. Thank you, Ms. Redding. Is there a second for that motion?
I second.
Ms. Ionetti, thank you so much. Questions or comments from the board?
Go ahead, Mr. Held.
I think this is where I recuse myself from voting on this. My wife falls under this compensation plan. She is an employee of Garretttown as a recess and lunch aide, and so I will be abstaining.
Mr. Held, just for clarification, you're able to abstain for just a part of the motion, so when we get to the vote, you can either abstain from the entirety of this motion, or you could abstain just for the plan which your spouse is a part of. So when I call for abstentions, if you would just provide that clarification, I think that would be appreciated. Does that make sense?
All right, great. Will do. Thank you.
Certainly. Other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And does anyone abstain?
I abstain. This is Jenna, so I'm going to abstain just from the compensation plan that relates to the cafeteria and recess aides. I have the same issue as Mr. Held. My spouse is an employee of the district who falls under that plan. And so in order to avoid any appearance of impropriety, I'm going to abstain just from that plan. But I would like to vote aye for the remaining plans.
Ms. Evans, thank you. Mr. Held, I'll flip it back to you again.
Thank you. Yes, I will now abstain from voting on the same motion as Jenna just had for the same reasons. My wife is an employee at Jarrettstown as a recess and lunch aide, and so I'll be abstaining from that section.
Okay. Appreciate all that. Ms. Evans, do we have that properly recorded as to what the abstentions were? Excellent, excellent. We've now voted on a couple of motions. The first thing I want to do is to say a thank you from the entire board and the entire district to Mr. Hoffman. Dave, thank you so much for everything you've done for our district over the last 5 years. We wouldn't be where we are without you. It's bittersweet. We're sad to see you go, but we know you're going to benefit other people and other kids in so many different ways. And on behalf of the entire board, I'd like to wish you the best always, and please always keep in touch. You always have a home here in Upper Dublin. Secondly, we had a welcome now to our school district, and Ms. Drennan, Julian, welcome. We are pleased and honored and privileged to have you joining us as our assistant superintendent. We look forward to all your good work for our children, for our community, for our district.